Welcome to another episode of Unlock Your Child's Full Potential. Today we're tackling a topic that's always in the back of our minds as parents, the teen years. Whether your child is a toddler, a tween, or somewhere in between, understanding how to parent through adolescence can feel both intimidating and essential. My guest today is Janine Mushawar, a parenting coach who specializes in helping moms and dads build strong, connected relationships with their teenagers. Through her Parenting Mastery program, she equips parents with strategies to stop the battles, reduce frustration, and create a calm, peaceful home where everyone thrives. In this conversation, Janine will share how to navigate common challenges like disrespect, lying, and miscommunication while also offering practical tips to be your teenager's go-to person. We'll explore how to rebuild connection when it feels lost and strike the right balance between offering independence and maintaining safety in today's world. Even if your kids are younger, this episode is packed with insights to help you feel more prepared for the years ahead. So let's dive in. Janine, welcome. I'm excited to have you on the show today.
Hi, Billy. I'm so happy to be here and thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm so honored.
Okay, I know you're a mom of three adult kids. Was your journey raising them what led you into this work as a parenting coach? Like, tell us a bit about how you got started and what inspired you to focus on parenting teens.
I parented just pretty intuitively for the early years, and I felt like things went fairly well. I mean, obviously, parenting is tricky and messy, but I felt like what I was doing was effective and really helping them. And I think that's what we're all looking for. When the three of them got to the high school years, especially my middle one, things started getting just really bumpy and tough. And I was still like using my same parenting approaches I had been using in when they were young, and it just wasn't working anymore. And as I saw either my daughter being stressed and overwhelmed from all the pressure she'd put on herself to get, straight A's, and felt like I really wasn't effectively helping her move through those feelings. It seemed like we kept getting stuck over and over again,
Mhm.
stressing about school and tests. And it felt like my approach and how I was trying to help her wasn't really creating change for her. My middle son, he was diagnosed with ADD and a learning disability at a young age. And when we got to the high school years, he started withdrawing. And I noticed his grades started suffering. And that just kind of all snowballed at getting into connecting with a group of friends that weren't the greatest influence. Then that rolled into smoking. And as his behavior got more risky and he was blaming and not taking responsibility and lying, I got more and more scared. And so I like tightened the reins. And there was more rules and more consequences. And it became very clear that that was not working at all. And worse, he was like pulling away and disconnecting from me and from the family. And that was just heart-wrenching as a parent. And then my youngest one, he was in the middle of COVID. And so just navigating that isolation that the kids felt, and all of a sudden spending a lot of time on video games and on YouTube. And I remember thinking, "Well, you're so lazy, that's not productive." And again, the things that I was doing to try to help him and motivate him, I felt like weren't really effective either. And so, all that to say, I thought there's got to be a better way than this more kind of traditional way of parenting through rules, rewards, and punishments that didn't seem to be working. And so I went and did like a deep dive in dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, conscious parenting, and really changed my whole parenting approach with the three of them. And it was just so quickly, so transformational, where I could see that they started feeling less stressed, less overwhelmed. They started leaning in and wanting to talk and engage more with the family and share and open up more. And I just thought, wow, this is amazing. And I want to share this information with anyone who's willing to listen or interested in working with me. And so I went and got a life coach certification through a program that had like a specialization in parenting. And I became a parenting coach. And now I work with moms and dads one on one through a coaching relationship.
Amazing. And I love hearing that even though you started when they were already teens, it worked fast and it was effective. Because I know it's best to lay a foundation in the first decade of their lives, but it's never too late, right?
I love to share that thought with parents because I think a lot of people feel like once my kids are in 11th grade or 12th grade or even young adults in college, like it's too late. And when I really changed my whole approach, my daughter was 19, my son was a senior in high school at 17, and my youngest was 14. And yes, is it easier if you start like working with a coach like you when your children are younger? Absolutely. And it's never too late to change your approach. Like if you prioritize family like I do, and you want a relationship with them as adults when they have kids, and you want to be a grandparent and involved in their life, and you want them excited to hang out with you when they're adults, then to me, it's never too late. This is a relationship that you're going to have for decades. And wherever you are in your journey, just like jump in. And, if you feel like you don't have the connection you want, just start learning some new strategies and tools and approaches that you haven't tried before, and you'll be on your way.
Let's give people a practical advice. Like you said, if they feel they've already lost the connection, what's a simple thing they can do right away to make things better?
Yeah. So, okay, this hits home hard because I really was feeling that when my middle one was starting his senior year in high school. And the main thing I started with, if I had to just say one thing, it's really two that I would suggest. But if you really want just one, I would say it was really to take a few deep breaths, try to settle my own fears and worries, and start asking some curious questions. And what I mean by that is, I know most parents, like myself, like most of my clients, we engage in conversations with our teenager very similar to the way we engage when they were younger, which is this kind of subtle conversation about, hey, you really should do
Mhm.
this, right? You should really study before you hop on YouTube when you come home from school, right? Or you need to. You really need to go see the tutor in math because your grade's plummeting. Or we give our advice, we offer life lessons. And that it makes total sense that we're doing it because most of us parented that way and it worked when they were younger. But now that they're teenagers, they're like trying to, beat on their chest and exert their independence. And so when we use that same approach, that's not what they need anymore. I like to share, like, okay, when they were young, they were curious and we provided our wisdom. And now we have to flip that. We need to be curious and help them develop wisdom. So if it was one thing, I would say try to lead with curiosity, which is super, super tough when
It's
you
tough
have
because sometimes they
teenagers.
answer with one word sentences or they go to their room and hang on their phones. So, what do you do with a teen like that?
Yeah, great question. It starts with you taking the time to settle your own fears, worries, anger, frustration, resisting that urge to like, oh my God, you just looked in their school portal and they failed that test and you're really angry and you go charging into their room. Like that's just a recipe for disaster. So you really want to try to settle your own fears and worries. Take a few moments and do that so you're not entering the conversation in this heightened emotional reactivity, but instead you feel more grounded and calm. And then I really encourage my clients to start the conversation with just stating the facts. It's a dialectical behavioral theory approach. And the idea is you just say, like, hey, I noticed you got a D on the test, right? So there's no tone, there's no judgment, there's no sarcasm, right? Because if we can enter the conversation that way, you have a better chance of your teenager kind of dropping their defenses and engaging in a conversation with you.
Mhm.
But when you come in guns blazing, like, I noticed you tanked that pre-calc test and you promised you would study and you're spending so much time on your phone. That's why there's a right. If you come in like that, then our teenagers feel like, oh my gosh, my mom's disappointed in me. She's probably going to give me some sort of consequence or punishment. And when your teenager starts feeling that, that shuts them down and why we get the one word answers.
Mhm. And
We
the
want to
tone is
kind of,
so difficult to master. It takes so much practice.
and to take out like the little judgmental words that oftentimes we're just not even aware that we're saying,
Yeah, it's
you
tough.
know, it is a process.
What about if they're being disrespectful? I know a lot of parents get really triggered by that. So, how do you approach a teen who's already rolling their eyes or using words they should not be using at home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a big one. I certainly got triggered. Lying was like a real trigger for me, and also the disrespect. I think a lot of reasons people get triggered with the disrespect is many of us grew up in homes where we were punished if we said anything disrespectful. And so, because we were mostly scared of our parents, we did what we were told to do. And so when we know now, like, okay, well, I don't want to like exert all my power over my kid and try to control them. I'm trying to teach them here. It feels very triggering when they're disrespectful. And I think most of us fall back on how our parents handled the disrespect. Where I start when I'm talking to my clients when they bring the issue of disrespect to a call is just saying, the best thing we can do to start is to understand, try to slow down and understand what's going on for your child. So I'll ask the question, and your listeners can ask themselves this question. Why do I think my child's being disrespectful right now? Because most of the time, your child doesn't intend to be disrespectful. They don't want to be disrespectful. Like something's going on inside of them. They're frustrated. Maybe they don't feel good about themselves, not smart enough, not pretty enough. Something's going on inside of them, and they don't know how to express it in a healthy way to you. And so it comes out as maybe being disrespectful. So if you go in with this beautiful intention on talking about a grade that didn't go well, or that you discovered a vape pen in their backpack that
Mm.
they're smoking, and you go in there with that, what we talked about earlier, well, you need to do this or you should do this, and you're really angry and fired up. A lot of times they'll just be disrespectful and yell back at you. Again, if we can slow down and ask ourselves, well, what might be going on for my child right now that's causing them to be disrespectful? Versus thinking, my kid's disrespectful, he's rude, he hates me, he's mean. I think that's where
Right.
a lot of our minds go to. But trying to slow down and go, hi, I wonder what's going on that he is being disrespectful. What's he thinking about and what's he feeling? What's going on in his world? Because if you can understand why they're being disrespectful and where that's coming from and talk about that, that's much more effective in motivating them to not be disrespectful versus just offering some sort of discipline or punishment.
Right, because you're addressing the root cause of the
Yes.
behavior, and there's a need that is not being met, that this kid is just trying to communicate.
Yeah, exactly. They are trying to communicate. And if we can just look at it as they just don't know how to communicate what's going on inside of them in a calm, respectful way yet.
Yet, yes, because they're still developing, even though they're 14, 15, 16 years old. I think often we have too high expectations of our kids. And
Yes, absolutely. I think we forget that we're looking at the behavior through the lens of a 40-year-old or 50-year-old. And we had time to grow and learn and figure it out. And they're still figuring it out. And so, if we can kind of identify what they're feeling and have a productive conversation about that, the disrespect subsides.
yeah, focus on the relationship and then the rest will follow. What
Yeah.
about if you catch your kid? You mentioned smoking or another behavior you really want to address and teach on that. How would you handle the conversation so it doesn't turn into a fight? How do you teach the lessons?
Yeah. Again, I would kind of slow down and try to start with why do I think my child's smoking right now? And kind of asking myself that question. So when I approach them in a conversation, I'm really seeking to understand what's going on for them. So, for example, I have a client whose kid ditched fourth period, went into the bathroom and was smoking. And what we uncovered is that he really wanted to be a part of this friend group. And a couple of the friends were like, come on, let's go smoke. It's no big deal. Don't worry about it. And so, because he was trying to fit in with this group and he felt like that pressure to fit in, he ended up making the choice to go smoke in the bathroom during fourth period, even though he knew it was a bad choice. And so when you uncover kind of what's going on underneath the whole thing, then you can have a conversation about that, which is like what you mentioned earlier. It's the root cause of the problem. Or, like, as another example, let's say they're lying and they're lying. I remember I would try to go trap my child in a lie. I would like get in my car. He'd say he was one place. I knew he wasn't. I go get in my car and I try to go bust him that, you're lying to me and you said you're going to be in one place and that's not where you are. And so it's realizing like, okay, that's going to cause your total friction and explosion between you and your child. Not a good approach, right? So what can we do differently? And so what I love to talk about with my clients is I look at this as lying specifically as there's just a thought error going on in your child's mind. And what I mean by that is like they think it's going to be better for them if they lie than if they tell you the truth, right? They think like, oh, if I tell the truth, maybe like mom's going to be disappointed in me or I'm going to get punished. And so I'm going to lie because that'll be better for me. So if we can have this conversation with our child and tell them it will always be better for you if you tell me the truth than if you lie. And in fact, when you lie, it's eroding our trust even more. And when trust erodes even more, I get more scared, more worried. And then I want to tighten the reins and put down more rules and more consequences. Right. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
slowing down and having this conversation with our children so they really understand that, hey, it's always better for you if you tell me the truth than if you lie. And then the
Yeah.
hard part is we have to follow through on it. We have to make it better for them when they tell us the truth. So they're incentivized and motivated to do that.
Yeah. And make it safe. They feel safe to tell us, even if they messed up. And we are
Yeah,
not freaking out, just trying to control our
exactly.
emotions.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so, if you are freaking out, that's okay. Just like say to your child, hey, you know what? I need a minute. I really want to talk to you about this, but I just need a minute and I'll be right back. Right. And just like you don't have to have that conversation like in that moment when you are just emotionally triggered and freaking out or angry or worried or scared, like give yourself a minute, take a few breaths, try to settle down. And then as you're entering the conversation, you're trying to understand what's going on inside of them and really exude some compassion for what they're feeling. Because most teenagers in these situations, they're feeling overwhelmed or pressure or embarrassed or humiliated or not smart enough or not pretty enough, all this stuff. And so like let's slow down and have some compassion for what they're going through and their big feelings, and then have the conversation after about, okay, well, that's not acceptable, and so let's collaborate on what we're going to do differently moving forward. I'm here to support you and teach you, or maybe not teach, they don't want to hear that, but I'm here to support you. I'm
Yeah.
here to help you help yourself. And let's figure this out together. Really trying to like approach it though as a team where you're thinking like, my kid's a good kid and he's just struggling right now with lying or with smoking or with grades. And how can we be on the same team and figure this out together?
I love this. It makes things so much easier. And you mentioned they don't feel capable, they don't feel liked. When you really get to the root cause and understand that's the issue, your child is having not enough confidence. How do you help a teenager feel more confident and okay with herself in the world and around her peers? Because that's a big issue sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, right. We all want to raise confident kids. And that confidence comes from trusting themselves. And so I think a great place to start, if you have a daughter who's really down on themselves, is to first just again like get on her team, her side, and validate those feelings. What I see happen all the time, and I was guilty of as well, is if my daughter's like, oh, I'm so ugly, I have no friends. And I think what most of us naturally, how we respond to that is like, oh my gosh, that's not true. You're
Mm,
beautiful and you have amazing friends. And look at all the friends you have. And you start naming off their names. And right, what's going on when we do that is it's this subtle way of telling our kids they're wrong,
mm.
right? It feels very real to them that they're not pretty enough or they don't have any friends. And so where we want to start is validating those feelings, right? Saying, hey, listen, it makes sense that you're feeling not pretty enough when you're spending hours watching those YouTube influencers who have filters all over them. Like anyone would feel ugly doing that hour after hour. Right? Or, okay, that makes sense that you're feeling right now really vulnerable because you didn't get invited to go out with that group of friends you thought were a part of. So it's starting there. And instead of telling them why they're wrong, really helping them feel less alone in whatever feelings they're having of unworthiness. And so really once you start there, that is so powerful in and of itself because it helps your daughter in this situation feel like, okay, mom gets me. Mom understands me. Like nothing's wrong with me for thinking this way or feeling this way. Right? And you can start there so they start trusting when their intuition is telling them something, believing it, and then knowing like, oh, I can go to mom to kind of help me work through these emotions that feel really awful right now.
That's a
And
great
she's like
point.
my rock.
Yeah,
So
that's a
I
great point.
always suggest like if you just start there, that's huge. And then we then can like go as the next step, start to have some conversations. I love suggesting to clients to have some conversations around what do you love about yourself? Right? What are you really proud of about yourself? And really trying to get them to identify things they do like about themselves and fill that tank, right? So they start really flooding their thoughts with positive feelings about themselves and identifying in ways that they admire And maybe if there's things they aren't real thrilled about, it's like, okay, don't be scared to talk about that. And then, try to, as a team, figure out, well, how do we want to address this situation? Because no one wants to feel not pretty enough or you don't have friends, right?
Yeah.
So, how do we want to look at this differently? What sort of different steps do we want to take? That's kind of where we start with that scenario.
Yeah. Thank
Does
you.
that answer
Thank you.
your
That was
question?
wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, perfectly. And while you were talking, I was thinking, we are a team. There's a lot of trust between us. And then comes social media, technology, and the safety issue. What do you think of monitoring their devices and checking their texts?
I don't know about you, but to me, it always felt awful, like monitoring their devices and checking their texts. And I felt like all of a sudden I had a whole job that I never planned on doing. And I felt like a police officer. So, yes, we do need, some firm boundaries around tech. I think our children need help, just like we need help,
Mm,
right? These algorithms are powerful and we get sucked in for hours and hours. And, I think that's a great place to start is just have this conversation and be honest with your kids. Like, listen, I open up Instagram and I think I'm going to be on it for 5 minutes. And a half hour later, I'm still scrolling. And now I'm mad at myself and I feel awful, right? So just first starting by helping them feel like, hey, nothing's wrong with you for wanting to be on your phone all the time. It's wired for us to be drawn in. And then just to have some conversations around it so they can start building awareness about how they feel when they're using their tech. Because I know for a fact, like if I just take myself, for example, initially it feels pretty good. Maybe I'm seeing some pictures of friends and their kids and everything's going great. But there's some point where it flips. And all of a
mm,
sudden, I'm feeling lethargic and not motivated, maybe not great about myself and my family. And there's just this point, I think, for everybody, our kids included, where it flips. And so I really urge my clients to have conversations around, because these are teenagers now. So have
mhm.
conversations around how does whatever they're doing, right? Hours on YouTube, TikTok, video games, whatever it is. How do you feel when you are playing a video game? How do you feel when you stop after a half hour versus 4 hours? Right. And start a dialogue so they start developing some self-awareness about, yeah, you know what? It doesn't feel really great, sitting in a dark room, video gaming, 4 hours later, coming out. Like, I've got low energy, I'm not motivated, or hours and hours watching makeup videos on TikTok. Well, now I feel really ugly and incompetent because I don't know how to do my makeup that way, right? Versus in the
Yeah,
beginning, it's like, ooh, that's so cool. So I think for everybody, our kids are little humans and we're big humans. I believe there is a point for 99% of our kids where it flips. And so let's try to start and have a conversation about that to give them some self-awareness and to start helping them build those tools, the tools to self-regulate and to have in your back pocket, like some sort of protocol where you can put your phone away or you can put it down, you can turn it off. Because the fact is they're going to be in college in no time. And if we're trying to
exactly.
control devices from turning off the Wi-Fi at a certain point or taking their phone away, like what's going to happen when they go to college? So I really try to just remind parents like we need to help them build these skills now in the safety of our homes so they have really good life skills around their phones and other things when they're ready to launch.
Exactly. Yeah, building the life skills. That's our job as parents, right? Not just to control them and tell them what to do, but help them
Exactly.
learn. This has been so helpful, Janine. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you if there's just one piece of advice, and I think we touched on it earlier, but maybe you can mention the second thing, or any encouragement parents listening today to walk away with. What would that be?
Yeah, we did talk about leading with curiosity. I'll give one other little comment on that is when you're doing that, if you just change what you're saying and start with a what question versus a why question, that alone tends to help your kids not be so defensive. Something like, hey, I noticed you got a D on the test. What happened? Versus, why'd you get a D on the test? Right. So just
Okay.
like that one little thing, just to piggyback off of the curiosity point. But I think I also just want to share parenting is hard. I'm sure you talk about this all the time. It's messy, it's tricky. And especially when our kids hit the teenage years, we have zero education on how to parent teenagers. And so I would just hope whoever's listening, like, don't beat yourself up. Don't get down on yourself. I remember thinking, like, I'm a smart, bright woman. I went to Stanford. Like, why can't I figure this out? And really like down on myself. And so I think the main thing I want you to know is if you're out there listening and you're frustrated, just know you're not alone and you're not a bad parent. You're listening to this podcast. So that should tell yourself that you really have beautiful intentions and you prioritize your family and you want to show up and be the best parent you can be. And then also just to remember that our kids, when they hit the teenage years, they're really still learning and growing. And how can we slow our own fears and worries down and have some compassion for their struggles and what they're going through? Because I'm sure all of you have really good kids who maybe are just struggling with some behaviors. That's what I'd love to end on.
That was beautiful. And maybe just share a parenting book you love. Is there one?
Yeah, I really love Dr. Becky Kennedy. She has a book called Good Inside
And a
and
podcast.
and a podcast. Anytime she says anything, I feel like it's so aligned with my philosophy and my beliefs. So I think if this episode resonated with you, I would go check out her podcast. And she's got an app you can use, and she's just filled with incredible resources. So I think she's
Yeah,
amazing.
I love
But
her too.
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, Janine. I know our listeners will want to connect with you further. Can you share the best way for them to find you? And I know you have a resource, 50 activities to connect with your teenager. It sounds like a great place to start. Just tell us more about that.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great resource and a great place to start because really, I think if we can start building up that, filling up that gas tank with connection experiences with our kids and really try to find ways to connect, whether it's sitting down next to them and learning how to play a video game or, taking an interest in their TikTok makeup influencer. I have a whole list of 50 different things that you can do together that I have done with my teenagers. So they're not lame ideas, they actually work. And the reason I love offering this to your listeners is because I think we all really want to jump to correcting or stopping the behavior that our kids are doing. And in order to have a conversation about that, we first have to have a connection to them. And so we want to really have as many connecting, joyful experiences that we can have so that when it's time to have the tough conversations about trying to motivate them to make better choices, they already feel very connected to us. And so they're more agreeable.
I have a
So
great phrase I love about that. Rules without relationship equals rebellion. So you need to focus on the relationship first in order to enforce the rules.
I love that, Billy. So good. So yeah, go check out that freebie. And then also the best way to connect with me is probably just to go to my website, JanineMushawar.com. I'm sure you'll probably link that in the show notes. I don't have to
Yes, I'll
spell
put
my
that.
name, which is complicated.
I'll
Or
put
you
it in
can
the show
find
notes.
me. Thank you. You can also find me on Instagram at Janine, Jeanine the parenting coach. And I also have a Facebook group just filled with parents, moms, and dads, and we love to support each other in there as well. So you could go look for that too. It's
I
all on
love
my
the
website.
Facebook groups because they're where you're surrounded by like-minded people. You feel free to just share your struggles and not be judged for anything you did, reacted, or the way you handled things. So I love that.
Exactly. And we could all use that support.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you, Janine. It was nice having you.
Thank you for having me, Billy.
Thank you so much for listening and letting me be a part of your day. If you enjoyed this episode or the show in general, please consider rating it and leaving me a review. Reviews are literally the lifeblood of a podcaster and help me so much. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Wednesday.